Yeah, the transparency stuff's obviously paramount. You know, I come back to, well, I mean, looking at the golden tax problem right now and the indictment, right, or the allegations, whatever they're calling it, right, you know, is that you know, they weren't transparent. They didn't show to the full market what it is. And in fact, if we look at IT and the history of IT, the original promise of information technology was to deliver market efficiency on understanding all of these things inside of our business. But being built by developers, it didn't account for the intangibles and the unquantifiable stuff because it's hard. And also because it's subjective in nature. So you would have a different opinion on what the value of that transaction is to the community than I would. So standardizing it is near impossible. So, you know, we don't talk about religion, we don't talk about politics at the dinner table, right? So we avoid those sorts of conflicts when in fact, you know, maybe it's time we dealt with it. And, or we just realize that you can value it differently than me and I can be okay with it. But what we're seeing, like with Blippi and a lot of these other services, as more of this information becomes visible and can be concerned, even with, as I understand it, with Schwab, how do you pronounce it? Schwab? With this is about making that information visible so that that untangible can be mined out of these networks and out of the markets. And it's free and open public, which is why I'm so concerned about the Facebook stuff right now. But we don't need to talk about that.
That's a whole other panel.
That goes to vetting. You can't let, you know, it's about the vetting mechanism. You can't, Facebook can't vet itself.
Yeah.
But.
So, interestingly enough, the World Bank, I'm looking at an article, I don't know if you've seen the article, it's called The Secrets of Intangible Wealth. The World Bank did a study on, you know, basically, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier, that, you know, they looked at immigration. So a Mexican migrant to the U.S. is 5 times more productive than one who stays at home. And why is it? And a lot of people would say, well, it's because we have better machinery, more jobs, you know, that sort of thing. And in fact, but actually, it's because the average American or people that live in the U.S. have access to over $418,000 in intangible wealth, while people in Mexico only have access to $34,000 in intangible wealth. So the World Bank is quantifying this for an interesting study on these intangible benefits that we have from living in a place like the U.S. or Canada, where there's all sorts of access to more resources. There's a little bit more safety. Your access to things like venture capitalists. I would imagine that the access to intangible wealth here in the Bay Area would be incredibly high. That's why most, especially technology entrepreneurs, have their eye to moving to San Francisco, right? So I know we were talking about this a little bit earlier, and this is sort of what you worked on in the past and what this is all tied to.
The intangibles? Yeah, I think the current statistics that's been cited by Mary Adams in the Boston area, she runs the Intangible Capital Institute, a fine community. And 70% of the value of an organization is in intangibles. That's what the going statistic is. And intangible and tangible are not opposites. I like to say tangible and invisible. It's about making these assets visible. If you work at a corporation, you've got their internal way of classifying your knowledge, but as soon as you leave the corporation, you're invisible. And you go into this resume system, which is not vetted. You know, you just get hung up as invisible. This doesn't mean that you're not productive. I mean, there's all these people who are unemployed. It doesn't mean that value doesn't exist. It just means that there's not a corporation which is going to, convert that value into dollars. It doesn't mean the value doesn't exist. It means it's invisible. Outside the construct of a corporation, it's invisible. So what we want to do is make knowledge visible outside the construct of a corporation, and then re-import it to the corporation. So that somebody at T-Mobile can get a job at Boeing because, yeah, they do have some similar necessary skills. But right now, these two, they're divorced from each other. So it's about the transparency.
So do you think increasing intangible wealth in developing countries that are struggling would increase real wealth?
Absolutely. That's what we were trying to do with NAFTA. We were trying to bring a capital structure into Mexico with the engineers. Because the engineers had professional engineering licenses, a bank would underwrite, an insurance company would underwrite a professional engineer. We would go down there with the Mexican engineers, and we would have the capital structure behind us to develop the country.
And Chris, with the social media club, have you seen, because of this sort of eye to the Bay Area and the wealth that's created here, right? The social media club, basically, as it expands across the world, is it creating more wealth in these communities that?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I mean, here in the U.S. even, it's doing that. Or some, you know, what we would think of from an advertising point of view as secondary and tertiary markets, where it's, you know, creating whole new businesses that are springing up from this. And, you know, I think part of the problem that we've had, to your concern before in the back, you know, we have to still encourage the serendipity that comes from this. We can't be looking at trying to measure every single knowledge exchange or conversation and management. There's a time and place for that. I think that the key hurdle is accepting, you know, what certain intangibles are, unquantifiable assets are, and just having an understanding that that's there and that should be accounted for when we're looking at it. When we start looking into third world countries, or new world countries, I think is the correct term now, right? As we start looking at that, I think that there's a tremendous possibility, just as we're doing this carbon cap trading, to be trading this future innovation potential, or some of these other intangible quantities that exist within communities who have proven themselves via Kiva or, you know, some micro lending or other places, that we can have established trust because there's somebody there who's trusted, and it's going to be this chain of trust from person to person to person that ultimately drives that.
Right. And Mickey, like probably the gazillion stories that happen on neighborhoods that become, well, not only better places to live, but also, have you seen the actual, like this intangible sort of exchange in your own neighborhood, for instance, where you probably started?
Yeah, I mean, you know, people are using tools that they borrow to build things that they then sell, or, you know, people are using other people's items in their own business, or they're, you know, meeting with people and then creating businesses and those sorts of, you know, I mean, you know, that's just the virtue of people meeting. But there's something weird, back to the sort of quantifying this thing. Like, I think neighborhoods works. I mean, we know neighborhoods and other tools, whatever. It's not just neighborhoods, but it's like, I don't think it's about coming up with some global system for quantifying this stuff, because that's kind of how we got to this problem in the first place. It's more about giving people the information they need to figure out how they value things and letting them make that decision. So providing tools for people to use things other than currency to get what they need, right? Like, that's the key, I think, is like giving them other ways to share skills, information, you know, whatever it is, instead of it being, how can I make these skills, how do I figure out how much money it's worth? Because then we're back in the money equation.
Yeah, exactly.
Someone with a hole in the door was a really good analogy.
Oh, right, with the drill. So, like, right, like some people really want to own the drill, you know, like if you're a master carpenter and you need to own all these tools. But if you're like me and you just need to hang up some art, you know, you need the hole in the wall, not the power drill. And so you have to figure out, like, how much is that worth? Like, how much is the power drill worth versus how much is the hole in the wall worth? And, you know, what is the appropriate transaction to gain access to that thing?
Any other questions? We have about 5 minutes left. More questions? Comments?
I'm not a panelist, so I keep talking.
Yeah, that's fine. That's good.